Okay, how many people here have invested in Bitcoin? Okay. How many people here know what kind of the blockchain is as technology? Okay. All right. I wanted to start by saying that the Milken Institute is a nonprofit organization. And as a nonprofit organization, we are always looking for new and innovative ways to fund ourselves. So we are doing an ICO as part of this panel. We're calling it Milkcoin. Milkcoin. And you can earn Milkcoin by asking good questions and by laughing at all of my jokes and being polite to my panelists. So
she has to be very careful. I'm going to see what she's doing.
yeah, I'm being regulated by one of my panelists. This doesn't seem like a good idea, actually, for me at all.
No transfer of value, though.
No, this is.
We can back the coin with diamonds, so
Okay.
it's pegged to real.
Awesome, awesome. All right, so Bitcoin is now at over 4,000. Jamie Dimon has said that he would fire anybody for investing in Bitcoin only strictly on the basis of being stupid, and that's a direct quote. There are 900 plus cryptocurrencies in the world. ICOs are taking off all over the place, and guess what? We're not going to talk about any of that on this panel. Too many people are confusing the cryptocurrencies with the underlying blockchain technology. And this panel is about the incredible promise of the underlying blockchain technology. And so my 2 or 3 sentence sort of primer on the blockchain, and they'll tease out some of the key facets as they speak. But my kind of 2 sentences on it is that we used to all have our own databases. And we used to be in kind of a messaging game among those databases. So I have my database, you have your database, we message between us, we try to make sure that our 2 databases are reconciled and we agree, and it's, and the way that we get better at this is by making that sort of messaging faster and more efficient. And blockchain upends all of that because what it is it is a shared database. So everybody that's participating on a blockchain shares the database, they update the information, they agree that that information is valid and represents the state of the world, and there are rules. And if you don't trust each other and you're very public, then you have more stringent rules than if you're a database wherein you do trust each other. And that core concept enables a number of different things. First of all, you can trace the provenance of things on the blockchain. Second, you can have records of things that used to be kept on paper form, now can be kept very easily on the blockchain. You can have a financial system whereby you can keep back office clearing and settlement and all kinds of different layers of inefficiency can go away. You can have a...
You mean the regulators?
Yeah. You can have a robust and customizable and individually owned sense of identity, even if your government doesn't give you one. You can have smart contracts that execute automatically, where you know for sure that if a state of the world happens, your contract is going to get paid off. These are the main characteristics and the main benefits of the blockchain, and we are delivering them all to you, ladies and gentlemen, right here on this panel. So I am not going to do too much more talking, and we're just going to kick right in. So let me start with my very first panelist, Sopnendu Mohanty, who is the Chief FinTech Officer at MAS. And why don't you talk a little bit about some of the projects that MAS has going on in blockchain land?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So like all of us, some of us, we don't understand blockchain. So we thought instead of writing a white paper and putting a public consultation and hoping a policy change will happen in 3 years' time, which will make the technology irrelevant or far bigger than we understand, we thought of going through an experiment. So I think the new motto for MAS is policy making through experimentation, not through white papers, which is kind of a bit useless in the world of technology. So we started looking at experimenting the whole technology, and there's no better way to start an experiment to disintermediate yourself. So the first project we picked up was how do we decentralize what we do today, the settlement and reconciliation of the whole domestic payment network. And so the project has been broken into 6 parts. The first part is we just got completed. It is domestic payment using blockchain and issuing Singapore SGD denominated digital currency into the platform. We completed the project with 10 banks, and the report is out there. Almost 100,000 downloads has already been taken place on that report. It's a very detailed report how we have mapped the current domestic payment system and how do we run a pilot on a production grade system on putting blockchain as an alternate to a distributed way to transfer money. Then the second part of the project is to take all the 3 major code base. This is a CODA from R3, then Ethereum and Hyperledger, and replicate the same model in the 3, so we know that the 3 platforms are interoperable in a way, so that we don't want to end up in a situation where one set of platforms succeeds. So there has to be some interoperability in this whole thing. And plus, one of the intrinsic advantage of the blockchain is the nature of anonymity. Now, as a central bank, central clearing, we can always do netting because we see all the transaction. Now, how do you achieve netting without actually seeing this transaction in a distributed mode? Big technical challenge, which we are trying to solve as we speak. Hopefully, the results will be out by November. The third part of the project is settling delivery of the stocks with the exchanges. Fourth one will be the cross-border transfers, because we believe that's perhaps the most disruptive, disintermediating the whole foreign currency dependency on the overseas transfer. If we can get 2 central bank, 3 central bank to do something together, significant impact will have the market and when it comes to that particular side of the business. Lastly, the cross-border for security settlement. We do the domestic first and we do the cross-border. So these are the 6 projects. We have excellent team working to build it. Accenture is one of the partner in that process. They're here. We have all the major banks participating in that process. We thought we'll train ourselves to build all this thing. In fact, we're in the process of training 150 MAS and plus our industry staff on the whole technology. And we will be the first regulator to put a piece of code in the GitHub, which is the open source code, to see how you can build a true distributed payment system against the centralized payment system we have today, for people to comment and code more on that. So that's what we're doing. Very, very basic, very boring stuff in the whole set.
How do you do netting without with anonymity?
Yeah, that's a secret. We'll announce that shortly. We'll have proprietary right over that.
You could earn some. You can earn some milk coins if you tell us. Right here. As an American, it's just so irritating to hang around in Singapore, isn't it? Like the way they do things, it's just so rational and efficient and well thought through. It's really troubling.
The problem, we don't have talent like in America. We have a lot of talents. We just to build our own talent pool. We have to work very hard towards it.
Yeah. Greg Lee, in Haiti, after the earthquake, they lost all of the land registration paper. And they're still, is my understanding, trying to recover that. And you look at a problem like that and you think, we could do something about that. And so what are you doing?
Right. So Bitfury.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm introducing everybody one by one, and I forgot I was doing it that way. So Greg Lee heads Asia for Bitfury, and Bitfury, if you know this space at all, is one of the biggest Bitcoin miners. But again, we're not going to talk about that part of your business. Talk about the super cool things that you're doing in land registration and other areas.
Sure. Thanks, Staci. So Bitfury, one of the other areas that we concentrate on is building blockchains. We have our own proprietary platform, which is now open source, called Xia. And what Staci is talking about is Bitfury. We know the former Prime Minister of Haiti quite well. And he was lamenting about, you have this beautiful public records building, and not just land titles, but birth certificates, business registration. All the government documents are on paper-based. One day the beautiful building is there, and the next day it's gone. So how do you reconcile that? How do you, keep track of those things? And so blockchain is a way to have not only just a backup of your records, but also to have a digital representation of your records that allows you to trade it. But more importantly, particularly around land titling, and this idea came from our advisor Hernando de Soto, who's an economist who wrote the book Mystery of Capital. Is the success of some nations is really built upon clear land ownership. So then if you're a farmer, you can prove you have ownership of your land, then you can go to the bank, get a mortgage, buy a tractor, and so on and so forth. It's great for the economy. So what we have done in the Republic of Georgia, which is in Europe, not Atlanta, but is we've now put the entire land ownership, the land titling system on the blockchain. So not a pilot project, but it's in full production. So what does that mean? That means as a citizen of Georgia, instead of standing in line at the government office for, I don't know, hours or days, and then going to the bank, and then something else, the process of getting your land title takes time and takes money, both for the citizen as well as the government. But now we've streamlined this process in conjunction with the government, so now the citizen has a digital representation of their ownership. So it's not, in addition to the paper thing that you put in your safe or keep under your bed, but now you actually have not a PDF copy, but a unique SHA-256 hash code, which is a unique representation of your document. So what does that mean now? Oh, great. But means no one can erase your name. So if I'm in a corrupt country, sometimes what happens is a corrupt government official will give the property to their cousin. That won't happen anymore because now the record is permanent on the blockchain. Second, it's auditable. It's transparent. People can follow the flow. You can prove you have ownership of the land. And there's so many other things that you can do. And so we're taking that technology around land titling, but applying it to voting, identity, all sorts of things, trade. But specifically, it's a fascinating project, and we hope to bring that to other countries to also help around social good and helping people prove they own land. So that's just one of the ones I'll dive deep in today. So thanks, Staci.
So, Leanne, you had a long history in the jewelry business, and you woke up one day and, well, I don't know what you thought to yourself one day when you woke up, but anyway, the next day you founded Everledger to try to get at the idea of provenance, and you saw that the blockchain could really establish a legitimate or an illegitimate provenance for goods. And can you tell us a little bit about sort of how you had the idea, how you established Everledger, and what you're trying to do in that space?
So I guess it goes back to the mid-90s. I've just given you a hint at my age when I began working in RFID.
You were in kindergarten when you had this idea?
No, not at all, but very smooth. I worked in RFID, so radio frequency identification, at the silicon and inlay chip level, and for the better part of 25 years I've always sat in an engineering role. And so I've been quite used to track and trace technologies since the mid-90s, and I guess I've only just been recently touted as serial entrepreneur, which I translated to free rent in London, which is good. But I spent the last 10 years at the nexus point of jewellery and insurance, and it was there that I learnt a number of concerns, and that was around fraud, around how documents are being tampered and presented around a proof of ownership or a proof of value, which were indeed false. So if I ended up with a backpack, I ended up going to London. I drank a lot of beer in London, which was my other very formed well skill from Australia. But actually, Everledger started as just a mistake. I ended up at a hackathon at Aviva, which is one of the larger insurers. I think they're represented here in Singapore as well. And I was there as a Trojan horse to actually speak to the CFO. And they were having an innovation day. So there was great cold pizza and flat Coke. And I thought, well, if you want something innovative, this is what you can do. And I'd seen the rise of cryptocurrency and what was happening with Bitcoin. And I understood that we could effectively take a digital twin of a rising asset class. So, diamonds, watches, art, jewellery, everything that's important to not only everyone in this room, but to generations to come, to governments and organisations and antiquities being another form of asset. So if we're able to take a digital thumbprint of these objects and effectively mark them in the blockchain, it will start to help solve some of the problems in the diamond industry. And I guess we have the perfect storm. We're starting to see the rise of synthetics at a gem quality standard, particularly in the last number of years, with only detection methodologies coming into play within the last 2 to 3 years. We've seen those peppering the supply chains. We've started to see consumers really question where their items are coming from. We've also seen governments starting to question what corporations are doing in their buying and their procurement. Are there sustainable supply chains? So I guess we picked one of the most challenging industries, but again, one of the most shining examples of how this technology can transform and provide transparency to the once opaque. It's a 500-year industry that's really been born on a gentleman's handshake and a chit of paper to pay. And really, since 1888, it's been asking for permission and forgiveness. You know, it's done some things really well and some things questionable. But as we started to really understand the mechanisms of blockchain and consensus methodologies and all of really the distilling power of this new technology, we were able to couple that directly across to an existing business network that presides on trust. It knows and understands, generation upon generation, that that industry relies upon trust, that promise that this diamond is real and that the payment is going to occur. So we took the challenge. We were probably one of the first companies to be production ready. We have about 1.68 million diamonds, but who's counting, in Everledger, where we have provided a digital twin. We track from the source of the mine to the market, and to the back end of this year and early 2018, you'll start to see that offering actually be offered out directly into the consumer's hands. So there you go. That's kind of what we did.
And you have plans to expand to beer next, as I understand it, right?
No,
Provenance?
actually it's wine, fine wine.
Uh-huh, fine wine.
Anything
okay.
I like to drink, wear, watch, drive, fly, maybe.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I always wonder about certifying the provenance of men, but that will leave that to the Women's Day next year. David Treat, you have said that a digital identity is a basic human right. So it's a pretty profound statement. So can you elaborate on that and then tell us what you're doing with the UN and what you're doing in Accenture? And David Treat is managing director and head of all things blockchain and FinTech at Accenture.
Thanks, Staci. I can't stop thinking about the provenance of men now, so I'm going to work on that one. It's somewhat related. So I have the huge fun of being able to cut across all industries in my role, albeit I've grown up in financial services and focused on those use cases a lot. And one of the things that has come out, as Greg and Leanne have just both demonstrated, identity is at the heart of really all of the blockchain use case discussions, because at a basic notion, you're trying to get into a shared data system. The identity of who's in that network and that system is a key part of it. So with a first world mindset, how are we going to make money, complete kind of commercial focus, we were getting together with some of our key partners, and this just happened to come out during some work we were doing together with Microsoft, and we were both fired up about identity, and in the midst of that ended up meeting this woman, Dakota Grenier, who's formed this group called the ID 2020 Alliance, aimed at really the people who have the most dire need for an identity solution, the 1.2 billion people in this world who have no form of recognized identity. So we're talking about refugees, the poorest of the poor, the most disenfranchised, and it just became immediately obvious to us that we should just focus there. And so we did. So we got together, we thought about what are the requirements of what that, what is that use case? What is the requirements of a refugee in particular? And the key to it really is four things, and it's 4 P's. So the alliteration helps me a little bit, but it's got to be personal. So a digital identity ultimately has to be definitively associated with the human. Now we've had a long-standing focus. We've worked with UNHCR, border control systems, et cetera. We focused on biometrics for a long time, and so one of the first realizations was we should be putting biometrics and blockchain together. If we can create a blockchain-based identity, you got to be able to definitively associate it to the human, marry those two concepts together. So that was kind of thing one. The next thing is it has to be portable. You have to be able to take it wherever you are, right? And it can't be, you can't, if I'm, God forbid, right, swimming across some, water mass to try to get to a new place and my passport sinks, right? That you can't rely on a physical thing necessarily. It's got to be truly portable and ubiquitously available. And then we're starting to get into where the blockchain really comes into play. The next thing is private. It's always funny, right, if you poll an audience of, who still thinks they have any form of privacy, right? When you think about where your data is and who controls it, it's not us, right? It's the authorities that you work with, it's the service providers that you work with. Your identity's fragmented and distributed amongst all of those players. You can't pull out anything besides a single artifact, a passport, a driver's license, whatever. Your identity data is spread everywhere. And so core to this is there has to be some degree of privacy and control that we introduce, right? You have to be able to pick and choose what do you want to show to someone. So, my daughter, when she reaches, drinking age, I want her to go to a bar, right? I don't want her to show a stranger her home address, height and weight, and that information. I'd like her to be able to show something that says she's over 21, and that's it, right? Nothing else. So that kind of granular control over your data. And then the last thing is persistence. It can't be taken away. And this is, so Sopnendu made some perfect, brilliant comments in one of the earlier panels around the importance of national ID systems. And those are crucial. You have to have, as a nation, a governing nation, you have to know who's a citizen, who should be here and who shouldn't. Taxes, obviously, can't get away from that. The legal system, et cetera, is all dependent upon a nation knowing its people. Well, a refugee, by definition, has had a severe falling out with its nation, and it can get ugly as can be around that relationship. And so, the last piece of it was you have to have some degree of self-sovereignty. And so there's this interesting debate in the digital ID community around national ID versus self-sovereignty. And we basically again sat around and we said, you know what, both. There's got both, right? You need to have both. Serve the needs of a nation to work with its citizens, and the refugee use case of should that relationship fall apart spectacularly, the person needs to be able to keep what they have. And so that's what we did. We focused on a design that would do all four of those things. We're really proud of it. We're now focused and working with various NGOs to find the first target population to actually roll out the first version of this system. Happy to explain in detail how it works, but that's the gist of it. Is how do we take basically three simple concepts: an identifier that sits on the blockchain. It's a really narrow use of blockchain, but you got to put that identifier somewhere where no single authority can get to it, right? So in a permissionless public space, can't be taken away from anybody, and that's the only use of the blockchain. Link it to the human through biometrics, and then leave the data at its source. A nation's going to collect its data. The tax authority is going to collect its data. The your library is going to collect data. Amazon, whoever. Leave data at source. Index it against that single identifier. Link it to the human, and that's the basis of then being able to have a persistent ID that someone can suddenly start to have some control over.
The U.S. driver's license have an address on them only so that they could mail you your bill and your next year's license. It was the only and now it's just turned into the standard, form of ID, which was never the intent of it originally. Xia Zalman, who is the head of all things FinTech at MetLife and also runs LumenLab for MetLife. You have some pretty interesting ideas about how you can use blockchain that are even go a step further, I would say, than some of the things that the panelists have talked about in terms of executing on smart contracts. And so can you tell us a little bit about kind of the theory of that and then what you guys are piloting at MetLife?
Sure, thank you. So about a year ago, we started thinking about what could blockchain mean for the insurance industry. And put up your hand if you don't think the insurance industry can get a little simpler, right? So what we wanted to do is on the front end, potentially, how do we automate some of the rules in terms of what we do? And I'm going to go back to the smart contract in a second. And on the back end, how do we make the claim really, really simple? And so we looked around for a use case for how we could implement blockchain, and particularly distributed ledger and smart contracts, in a way just simply to experiment and test if this might work. The metaphor I like to use is we really want to make insurance as simple as putting a coin into a Coke vending machine. If you get the right size and weight of the coin, the smart contract issues you a 2 degrees Celsius Coke. How do we make it that simple? And what we're doing with the permission, hopefully, of the MAS in the sandbox is to think about this particular use case. The persona is a pregnant woman. So you learn approximately week 5 that you're pregnant. You don't know whether or not you might have gestational diabetes until week 30. And so for that intervening period of time, there is some risk or uncertainty. There are no insurance products to cover you for that period of time. But what if, using blockchain, we were able to issue over the mobile phone a contract that says, put in $100 in case you actually end up having GD, we'll give you a fixed benefit or payout. And the certainty of the 0 or the 1, do you or do you not have gestational diabetes, comes from the clinic and automatically gets dispersed into your account. So that's the experiment that we want to run. It helps women in particular, and I'd be happy to talk about the other risk pools that we might want to bring this to that could simplify insurance both on the front end and on the back end.
Why do you need the blockchain for that?
You don't necessarily do, but we thought that it might be useful to use it because it's private data that you're using, and we have a specific trigger, which you only want to demonstrate from the clinic. And the way it could work to link the different parties is one of the nice distributed ways of doing it rather than trying to pass a message. There's a lot of inefficiency using the old way of doing it, and that's what blockchain improves.
Let me ask the two of you, and then if you all have a sort of a similar reason to jump in, do feel free. But let me ask the two of you, what are some of the problems that you've encountered in terms of execution and you have a kind of a garbage in and garbage out problem, I would say. And do you find yourself in the position now of having to kind of put a good housekeeping seal of approval on things, and how sure can you be, and how did you kind of think about some of these issues?
Well, I think the biggest challenge in terms of implementing blockchain is really getting the parties involved understanding what it is. And when I'm speaking to people and describing what it is, we could do PowerPoints, have meetings, white papers, PDFs. And the real value is, say, forget all that. Let's just jump straight into pilot, proof of concept. Because from there, it's something you can touch, you can feel, you can show to other people. And it takes a lot less time. So in the case of the Republic of Georgia, the Ministry of Security is more of a blockchain expert than I think anyone on my team now, because now that she sees it, reads about it every day, is so engrossed on it. So now we've done land titling. She wants to put in IDs. She wants to put it on business registration, taxation. So I would say the biggest challenge is getting past that first step of, hey, let's do a white paper. And I really commend Mr. Mohanty and the MAS to say, we're not going that route. Let's do the touch and feel right away from the start. And I would encourage, if any enterprise or company here is thinking about it, just say, hey, let's do a pilot right away. So I would.
Have you guys noticed how much regulatory kissing ass is going on this panel? Am I the only one that picked up on that?
When they entered Singapore, they've been told what to do.
So I guess a couple of things. The blockchain, it's interesting for the diamond industry, and there is some regulator ass kissing going on, but the diamond industry is a self-regulated market, and it wants to stay that way. And for the better part of the last 200 years, we've relied upon the opinion of experts, gemologists, or those that are trained in the art and the science of recognising authenticity. But we've also seen an evolution of nanotech. So we've seen different forms of spectrography or radio sequencing coming into the industry. And so a part of the work that we've done is actually been a quiet coupling of the blockchain with IoT-enabled devices. So how do we take a pipeline that was traditionally passing from handshake to handshake that would look through a microscope and that the authenticity would be embedded upon someone's word or promise? How do we transcend that and take that handshake to the blockchain from a machine perspective? And so that's been both a technical challenge, but again, when we say it's not all about the money, it is about the money. The reality is that there has to be an economic reason and a derived benefit for why this is important. And so we can quantify where those numbers sit. We've had the major banks pull out of our industry with a $5 billion finance shortfall in the middle part of the pipeline. the descriptive text that was just given over the pregnant woman is similar to the diamond industry, where we have a parent stone, a rough diamond, that comes out of the ground. You know, it's mined at $15 billion a year. It goes through one iterative manufacturing step, at which point it transcends into a polished stone. It goes from 15 billion to 47 to $72 billion. One iterative manufacturing step, with someone who sits there and traditionally cuts and polishes that diamond. Now, the risk is that we don't know that if we go to cut and polish that diamond, if we're going to hit some arterial concern, right, and inclusion, and that diamond could shatter. Now, that one diamond could have a rough value of 30 million, and upon its transition, it could be worth 100 million over 2 stones or 10 stones. So again, the experts, what we've typically seen is diamonds being flown to the 1 or 2 or 10 experts in the world, or the experts are flown to the diamonds. But now with the introduction of blockchain and distributed data and the marriage and the hard handshake that we perform to machines, we're able to quantify that risk, again, at the time that the stone is born to the time that the stone is transcended into its next version. So the biggest challenge for us has been education. That transparency doesn't mean that we're standing naked to the world. That there are very real senses of science that we have with cryptography and privacy preserving mechanisms that we can actually give a fine balance between transparency and privacy. So,
on that education point, there's always a funny moment too, where there's the realization that at the end of the day, it's a new database system and it has all these wonderful benefits. But if you put crap data into it, it's still crap data, right? And it doesn't, it's not fixing that. It does add some elements of of transparency and auditability. But there is always that moment in that education process where they realize this is not a panacea for everything. Right? There are certain things that are benefits.
Just to extend, when we started this project, we tried to replicate what we do today into this new blockchain. It didn't work. It simply doesn't work because you have to rethink the whole process if you want to take advantage of technology. Just replicating what you have into new technology is as good as not doing it.
Say a little more about
For example, if you want to do a process by which the technology should operate, it takes 1 hour to validate a transaction. If I have to replicate the way that we run the entire domestic payments system. So we got to find a way into dealing some of these attributes of the data into some different way so that we don't overload the transaction with a lot of dependency under that. So a lot of re-architecting was required. And there are certain things as a central bank in the node we have to run. We just can't blindly replicate everything on the nodes. So we have to do some middle path to really make it a workable prototype. While we did learn a lot, there's an inherent challenge in the technology, and we challenged our software development community to come with a revised prototype. So that's the iteration process we are going through. And then we landed into a question is that how do we netting without looking at the transaction? In fact, I go further, zero knowledge proof. Without no understanding of the transaction, how do I trust it? So we are now pushing the entire system to the core value of the blockchain technology and see whether we can replicate the essence of moving money in domestic market. So we'll see where it goes. If you are coming to Singapore FinTech Festival with deep discount, you will get to see the results.
Do you take Milken for tickets?
If anybody wants to just Google how to explain zero knowledge proof to an 8-year-old, you'll get a good 10-minute read using the allegory of the caves to explain it. Otherwise, you need like about a dozen years of advanced cryptographic math, education to get it. But it's a good read.
Can I just build on that? It's just, for many of you in the room, you must be thinking, wow, this is a little bit obtuse. I think the one way to think about it is start from the customer. Don't start from the tech, the way it used to be done. So what did you hear here? You heard an example of protect my assets, protect my identity, protect something about me, the digital representation of me. And when we look at it from an insurance point of view, we say, what's the customer journey? How can we reduce friction? And if you look for that micro moment of value where somebody feels a little bit of uncertainty or risk, what distributed ledger and smart contracts might be able to do is a lightweight way to introduce a risk product in that micro moment of value. Whether it's, I'm afraid I'm going to be late for this particular flight, travel insurance that automatically pays back. The gestational diabetes example. Divorce insurance, we might go with that next to say, just in case you're getting married, we might be able to give you divorce insurance. Anytime there's a trigger where you're worried about something, this kind of technology might be able, is the pharmaceutical safe? Is that Persian rug a counterfeit? start with the customer in mind. Don't go back to the old systems. Re-architect it from the perspective of what we're talking about, and you get some better understanding how we can generate value with blockchain.
If we think about our scenario, our customer is the bank, and we'll get the wrong outcome. In our in our use case, our customers are the banks, and if you start thinking about their journey, what is good for them, we'll have a wrong experiment.
I guess just backing up a second, some of you here are probably thinking, well, why are you using blockchain? Why does blockchain make all this so magically happen? So if you think about the World Wide Web, the World Wide Web was designed in the 60s and 70s to digitize information. I can send an email, I can send a photo, but it was never designed for secure transactions. But we're all using it for our banking, sending trade data, whatnot, but everything's getting hacked because there's so many points of vulnerability because the system was never designed for secure transactions. So here comes along blockchain. Satoshi Nakamoto, who we don't know who he or she is, but the purpose of blockchain was, how do I create a system where two parties who don't know each other and in fact may not trust each other have a secure transaction? And that's the purpose of blockchain. So he or she created the system that basically says, I have a unique transaction, doesn't matter I'm Greg Lee and he's whoever, right? It's done by math, first. Second, we will put that on a public record. And that public record cannot be erased or changed or hacked again because of mathematics and cryptography. Second or third, that public record is distributed across, currently today, over 7,000 different nodes. So if I'm a hacker, first I have to hack our transaction. Second, I have to hack this transaction on the public ledger. And then third, I have to hack half of the 7,000 ledgers at the exact same time. So this is what blockchain is enabling all of these things to do, because you have an unhackable, transparent, and permanent system. So I just wanted to back up a second to help some of the people. So.
You know what we call this? An AMP, an autonomously moderated panel.
I think.
So in that spirit, just playing off Greg, because we were. Sorry, Staci. Do you want to take us in a new direction? You're good. It's one of the most interesting things about, right. So double spend is what you'll hear as the concept that one version of what Greg just described. That's just the beginning, right? And we were talking about kind of take Greg's example, right, of the work around putting land titles on a blockchain. What you've now created, and using Leanne's term, right, of a digital twin, you've now created essentially a digital twin of a house. That's now a digital object, is really, I think, the language that's starting to emerge, that then persists, and others can start to hook up to it and append data to it, and others can use it. And suddenly, for the first time, we're able to have a digital thing take on the properties of a physical thing. You can prove who holds it and who doesn't, that when it was created, when it's no longer in use, and so that becomes enormously powerful then as you extend the example. If you look at the house, right, the fight, the push into the digital house, right, between Alexa and Google Home and our security systems and the smart home concepts, there's this fight going on as to who's going to own the digital data that's emanating from our house. And I think we've got a really interesting construct coming that says, actually, if there's a digital twin of your house and you're in control of it, and you say, I can authorize these service providers to append data to it to update the fact that they replaced my HVA system, and then the next time I go to sell my house, the appraiser can access a set of information that says this authority did this thing to my house. It changed the value, and it's not simply an eyeballs on house kind of judgment. It's now actually a provenance of data of a digital object, and so we're going to come up with enormously new creative things over the next period as to what we can do with that.
Sopnendu, I'm going to ask you about the overall sort of regulatory ecosystem that will enable blockchain to develop and grow. But while you're sort of thinking about a good answer to that, Leanne, let me ask you: is there a market value test here that we can see? Are your diamonds worth more? Do you have a little bump in valuation because of the provenance, or are the houses that are on the land registry, are they sort of increasing in value because the blockchain is solving some of these things, or does anybody else have interest where the market actually appreciates some of the qualities that blockchain brings to bear?
Well, we certainly have a certification enablement in the industry where you can clearly see that a diamond that is certified as true and authentic has and currently does yield in the retail network around 30% greater value. And so that's in existence and has been traditionally since probably about the 1930s. Certification in the diamond industry is the currency of our industry. So it is effectively the way upon which diamonds are traded and transacted, both across borders in a rough form and then in a polished form. And then on the backdrop of that, you could arguably say that those that care about sustainability and transparency in supply chains, that they do care about the backdrop of anti-slavery and blood diamonds. Firstly, blood diamonds are illegal, and the Kimberley process has largely solved that problem globally. Then you will say that that non-tangible, not about the money element, indeed does yield a reputation layer that hopefully consumers will have a full consciousness of mind decision around the goods that they wear or the food they eat or the property they buy.
I think in the case of land titling, probably having a digital representation of your land ownership, at least at this moment in Georgia, there's no uptick in price. But if you look at the larger, and there are other asset classes where certainly would happen, like diamonds. But in the case of the land title, what it does enable, it frees up people's time, so that's a value. It frees up the use of capital, so instead of having your property sit in escrow, the value for 60 days while they check out the land title and it's sitting there, next step is you can trade your property instantly through smartphone using smart contracts. So again, it frees up capital and the flow of capital. And if you think about stock certificates and transferring that, then when do you actually physically receive the ownership of the stock? It's 3 days later. But if you can receive your stock instantly, then perhaps much more trade, much more flow, and it's, in essence, more taxation is clearer. All those, they are tangible, but not tangible to that particular asset just yet.
Don't forget, title insurance might go away.
Yeah, exactly.
And I want to kind of go down the line and ask all of you the sort of what next, what do you expect next question, and we'll try to give a little bit of time for questions from the audience at the end. So think of some good questions. But why don't you start with just sort of the regulatory ecosystem and how are you thinking? You need to be thinking 10, 20 years in advance.
No, we are not thinking. Actually, we are in the process of experimentation now. I think there's no, at this point, to be very honest, we don't have any regulatory view on blockchain. And we treat this as a new technology, and we continue to encourage the industry to experiment with us, bring your use cases. One thing we insist, when you come to us to experiment through our sandbox, through our proof of concept, come with a use case, and then you talk about technology. There are certain underlying technology risk management as a regulator, we do prescribe to that. If there are certain risks we see as part of the experiments, we'll upgrade our regulatory views around those aspects. Now, coming back to a couple of observations on points, to your question around alternate ID, I think there is a strong view, I think, to build an alternate ID on top of the national ID, especially when there are certain use cases, even in spite of national ID, to use alternate ID, especially when you're going cross-border. So that's a huge, strong case. But there is also a concern around and you talked about the data sitting at different institutions. We have taken a view that I spoke about the other panel, that instead of worrying about where the data sits, I think the owner of the ID should have a consent architecture where they know where the data sits, and when they share with the third party this data, they should know what services they're getting, and after that, if there's a breach of the services, then go after them through regulatory enforcement. So that's what my view. I don't really see that.
We share that.
Yeah, distribution of data and leave it there.
God damn it! I was hoping for some controversy on my panel.
Yeah.
So that's on the data side. So other than that, yes, I think we are quite hopeful that we will solve some of this structural challenges we are having in the blockchain space. The last to end with is not all about the money. I don't agree with that. End of the day, every use case has a collateral behind it. Somewhere down the line, if there's a breach of of a contract or a breach of an agreement, that it has to be backed with some finance. And I think the biggest unanswered question in the entire blockchain use case, the cost of collateral. It may actually significantly go up because there's no socializing of risk, there's no socializing of cost. It has to be managed at a transaction level. That's a problem we have to solve for.
Yeah, well, we should have called it "It's Not All About the Currency" because that's really what we meant by that.
It's about the money.
Yeah. Okay, so why don't we just kind of, and I do want to leave some time for questions, but maybe paint a picture of kind of what's next and what you're thinking about and what the world might look like in 10 years from in your space.
So the maybe 10-year out version would be digital representation of yourself. So your assets, certainly it will happen, your identity, but when it comes to your health data, are we moving fast enough using technology like this to represent everything about me and to give permission using smart contracts and distributed ledger for other people to be able to interact with just the part of the information that I want? So I think that we're a long way from there. The potential improvements in health outcomes, in healthcare, in efficiency, and in insurance are just astounding if we can get there.
Yeah, so from our perspective, it's really there's a life cycle that we go through as we engage with clients, and the education is really critical. And at some point, there's enough understood about the technology that it becomes the secondary aspect to it. And the thing that's going to have this technology drive, I think the transformations that it will drive is much more about getting the different players in an ecosystem to basically agree that a shared data construct has value, and figure out, to your case, that there's got to be, to your point, there has to be a business case for those stakeholders for that ecosystem, and a lot of our focus right now is to look kind of ecosystem by ecosystem to really plan out or envision who are those players who need to be joined up. Is there a central player that already has the network, right? Like a regulator or a clearinghouse in capital markets, or et cetera. And what are those dynamics of getting different parties to cooperate and collaborate in a business ecosystem to drive these transformations and come to the table, which at the end of the day has almost nothing to do with the technology, and it does become secondary as soon as you know enough about what the technology is capable of. This is really a business transformation topic and conversation, and how do we, to where you opened, right? How do we break these messaging-based business models? One of my favorite clients, head of a top 3 investment bank, characterizes his bank as I run a reconciliation business that does a bit of banking, right? And that's the extent of to your point again of the overhaul that's going to happen is when we strip out the messaging from what we do, what's the core value that's left?
Sorry, can I quickly butt on that? Sorry about that education piece. How many of us actually know how internet works? We don't really care, but we are able to work on the internet, able to send an email. There's a huge complex set of technology, TCP protocols that runs through this whole industry, a whole network, but it's completely transparent to us. I think blockchain will have the similar impact. We may not be fully educated about blockchain, but it will solve a lot of our problem without understanding that technology.
I completely agree with what you had said. I mean, sending an email, how many of us know how to code TCP/IP, right? So blockchain in the future, I think, will touch all aspects of our lives, whether it's e-government, health, insurance, banking, finance. But don't worry, you don't have to know how it works. You just have to rest in the fact that blockchain allows, to digitize assets, to have these permanent records that can't be tampered with. And it'll be amazing future because then you can automate a lot of things, less mistakes will happen, and things will be more efficient. So I think it'll be less than 10 years. And in 5 years, we'll start seeing a lot of these applications.
So I think the marriage of procurement and provenance, where we have supply chain transparencies. And what does this mean? We have a $1.7 trillion problem in counterfeit goods around the world. We have a $50 billion problem in insurance-related fraud with diamonds and luxury goods. Those problems don't disappear. They somewhat dissipate. We're seeing governments around the world beginning to legislate, owners or companies that are over 100 million in turnover or 30 million pounds a year, they must give transparency around their supply chain, and it's becoming a liability and a concern at the board level. No longer can you have enterprise, social enterprise endeavours sitting behind the marketing department. It's conversation topics that are sitting now within the boardroom where directors and officers need to sign a declaration. So I think that is important. Items that matter, Mother Earth's assets, ivory tusks, You know, diamonds, all of these things. These are the types of supply chains that we know will transform and that governments will legislate towards it. The money shot, you know, diamonds is the one commodity that's yet to have true financial products wrapped around it. Now, what do I mean by that? It doesn't have a futures market yet, and it doesn't have ETFs. But the underlying performance of diamonds outstrips platinum and gold and palladium. So why? Why is that the case? It's transparency and liquidity. So one could argue if transparency comes first and you have pricing discovery, then why not? Why aren't we thinking about rising asset classes? Why aren't we thinking about diamonds and art and wine and collections? There you go.
Okay, can I take some, Serge Poon, can,
I have a question for Greg. I'm very impressed what you said about land titles and so forth, and the fact that it's going to be, sort of genuine, bankable, cannot be erased, and it takes away corruption of that officer transferring to somebody else. But what happens if that same corrupt officer, who probably know how to maneuver blockchain than the property owner, starts taking a whole bunch of properties and put it all in this name, and then they cannot be erased in the future? What happens?
that's a very good question. I'm going to collect a couple of questions, though, so just to make sure we have time. Yep, in the back.
I have a question about what's the view of quantum computing's impact on blockchain? Because the cryptography that underlies blockchain assumes that actually it cannot be undone, but theoretically with quantum computing you can actually undo it. So that's the question.
Yep, okay, I'll take a couple more, and then we'll, yep.
Earlier, one of the panels, Sopnendu, you mentioned the challenge of nationalism on data, particularly in the financial services sector. By definition, blockchain takes away that domain from the regulator. So aren't the current regulations around nationalistic tendencies of regulators on data already obsolete?
Okay, any last questions? Okay, so what we have is, what if the corruption is so endemic and you make a mistake and then you can't get out of it, and sort of what do you do? That quantum computing kind of calls into question all of the immutability that is promised with blockchain, and then isn't it that a shared database kind of is borderless? And so, Greg, why don't we start with you, but then anybody kind of jump in to answer any of the questions.
Sure, that's an excellent question about, how does blockchain prevent corruption? So specifically in the case of the land titling, you have what we call private blockchains, which is like your own company's intranet, and you have the public blockchain, which is like the internet. So in this case, yes, if you only have your private blockchain, the intranet, then the system administrator could probably change something. But in order to prevent that, what you do is then you anchor or you link your private blockchain to the public blockchain, which everybody can see. And you timestamp it and you give it a unique hash code, and you say, okay, every hour or every day or every couple days, you check, has there been any data change? And as soon as a red flag comes up when you're checking with the public blockchains, anchoring, then you know something has happened. And then the next question is, well, how do I change it? If that record's permanent, I can't erase it, then you create a new record that will correct that mistake. You don't go back and erase that in the ledger. And then further on, what we see in the future is then governments or enterprises will then also run their own private blockchains on their own hardware. So now you have hardware security, you have your private blockchain security, and you have the public blockchain security in terms of this huge encryption that we were talking about. So, and that's one area that Bitfury is moving towards in terms of e-government. But to prevent the corruption at that level is you link your private blockchain to the public blockchain for extra layer of security.
You asked for some controversy. I'll challenge that a little bit.
Sure.
I think in the extreme use case, and it does become much more difficult. So the threat surface reduces, but if you put gun to my head, say give me your private key, execute transaction, then there's nothing to stop that, right? And we bump up against this kind of when we get into the real world implementations and production. At the end of the day, the humans are still a weakness. And this is not a panacea. But it does, but I will agree, it does become much, much more difficult. You can't have a government administrator access an entire database and do, copy paste on 1,000 rows and suddenly, they own, the southeast corner of the town. But it, just to be real, if this is public and private keys, if someone either through social engineering or force or manipulation gets hold of the keys, they'll steal your stuff, right? So key management is absolutely crucial, and traditional key management has to be applied.
So we are actually taking the entire, we've signed an agreement with the country of Ukraine. So we're taking the entire e-government of the Ukraine and putting it on the blockchain to help part of this situations in all aspects of running their government. So
let me take that question, Crypto. Very interesting question. I think that's something we don't have a smart answer to your question, but the way we have done a design principle around that. So we believe that we should not put raw data into blockchain. What we should be doing is exchanging bilaterally the data, putting hash on the blockchain nodes. So you'll never break into the raw data through the whole chain. So using design as a principle, we have tried to answer that question. But yes, you're absolutely right. That will have the downstream impact on when we reverse cryptography using quantum computing. Back to your question. Very interesting question, because I'm struggling to answer that question. This is going to get more and more difficult, because as you can always see the news, as news are coming through for different countries, are progressively are going to protect individual data in the respective boundaries, because they know the next oil is the data. And there is a huge policy impact on data being misused. So now what I sense more will happen is much more private players coming in the blockchain world. There'll be bilateral agreement to share data out of your own personal consent, not through a government monitored process. But then it's a long shot as we see today. Coming back again, even within that context of data itself, and one of the challenges broader for all blockchain thinking will be around, and I spoke about it, the digital exclusion due to data. More I know about you, more I'm going to exclude you. I can bet on that. If I know all your Google searches, I can run an algorithm through email, half of us in the room will not talk to each other. That's a fact. Because some point in time I would have based against you if I knew. I would tell something bad against you privately with somebody. So the data transparency creates a very strange problem. It solves the inclusion challenge. It solves the digital dividend. It also creates long-term an exclusion challenge in terms of how much data we want to put public, how much data private enterprise can use to offer solution or exclude people from solution. So these are the downstream data challenges. So on the nationalistic view on the data, I think it will continue to remain as you see today. But I'm trying very hard. As part of our program called AFIN in ASEAN region called ASEAN Financial Innovation Network, we are trying to rationalize with all our regulators. Some data can stay in the country, but insights can be processed outside the country. So it can add real value to the country in terms of new way to do credit scoring, new way to manage risk. So we're trying to separate raw data from insights data as we speak to our regulators.
So your raw data architecture actually goes counter to that.
As
yes.
Yes.
Yeah. That'll be sorry.
Yeah, what's going to be really interesting over the next couple of years is that this technology is going to trigger a renewed conversation around privacy, and what that conversation is going to look like is a negotiation between an authority and the individual. Right? Right now, that negotiation is just dumb. Right? We all just click the box at the bottom of the email page, the email form that says you consent to a bunch of terms that you can't read because the font's too small. Right? Where this is going, and we believe that there's a way to accomplish both ends, is that you're going to renegotiate with an authority to say, as a country or a nation, for you to be a citizen, there's a certain amount of data that we're going to share, right? We need to know who you are. We need to know, to form for taxes, for legal purposes, et cetera. There's a base minimum need. For your librarian or Amazon is a completely different need around what needs to be shared. And so for you to play with an authority, you will, I don't think there's any getting away from needing to share access to that data with that authority. However,
No
there
howevers. No.
no.
Wrap up.
The moderator has
Wrap up.
spoken.
Yep. Okay, I want to go down the list, down the line, 2 or 3 word answer each out of you for our bullet round. What will be the most impacted thing, either industry, or type of transaction, or what going forward?
So transparency, I think that unlike what you guys might think, I think inclusion might increase if we increase transparency and efficiency and give people, as David was saying, a little bit more power over their own data. It may take a little while, but the transparency might lead to more inclusion for all.
Okay.
if you make money simply by moving data from one hand to the other hand and you're not adding value to it, I think you're done.
I think this whole technology can make regulatory irrelevant in the long run. If you can self-govern, self-create smart contracts into the whole process, we may not see regulators operating in the real world.
We keep hearing about Internet of Things, and that will be run by blockchain, because blockchain will enable machine-to-machine transactions automatically, smoothly, and without error. So, Internet of Things.
I think the biggest winner is our next generation. So the convergence of all of these emerging technologies that are exponential coming together at a time within easily the next decade will completely and fundamentally change the way our children and our children's children are educated and use technology. And so that's the biggest winner.
All right, let's give a hand to our fantastic.